what is the meaning of Leibniz's mill? Now, Leibniz's mill is a very important trope in early modern philosophy, which is often used by so-called analytical philosophers to show that Leibniz is actually quite close to a materialist. I think that's utterly wrong. We find the mill example, or actually analogy, in the monadology. And what I will talk about now is how Leibniz's mill is an actual attack on materialism and on the crudest, most awful versions of materialism that were spouted, for example, by people like Marquis de Sade, where we get the word sadism from. Now, before I say more on Leibniz, let me just briefly point out why Leibniz and people like Bishop Berkeley, for example, would attack materialism, given what it can lead to with Marquis de Sade. I'm not saying that they, attack Marquis de Sade personally or directly, but they see, of course, where a crude materialism leads to. And Marquis de Sade argued in favor of torture, rape, murder, because all we are is just machines, highly complex robots. Therefore, there are no real feelings, there's no soul, there is no morality, etc. Now, this is actually not too different from René Descartes. For René Descartes, at least the body or anything that's material is just extension. So animals don't have a soul, animals don't really feel anything, and our bodies are just extension as well. There is, in a very abstract way, there is really no difference between my body and this very laptop that I'm using right now to record this video, because all basically is just extension. What distinguishes me from that computer is that I have a thinking mind that thinks about itself. So this is sort of obviously Descartes is a dualist and Marquis de Sade is a monist, but we see sort of the threat of materialism. And Leibniz shows us something very significant in the mill example. This is paragraph or section 17 of the monadology. And I'm reading Leibniz now. You'll find the quote in the field just below the video if you want to read along. Now I'm reading from Leibniz. It has to be acknowledged that perception can't be explained by mechanical principles, that is, by shapes and motions, and thus that nothing that depends on perception can be explained in that way either. Suppose this were wrong. Imagine there were a machine whose structure produced thought, feeling, and perception. We can conceive of its being enlarged while maintaining the same relative proportion among its parts, so that we could walk into it as we can walk into a mill. Suppose we do walk into it. All we would find there are cocks and levers and so on pushing one another, and never anything to account for a perception. So perception must be sought in simple substances, the monads I shall add, not in composite things like machines. And that is all that can be found in a simple substance. Perceptions and changes in perceptions. And those changes are all that the internal actions of simple substances can consist in. Now I read this as saying, is a beautiful analogy. What he's telling us is that, of course, we can think of a machine. Our imagination can do that. We can think of a machine that we then understand as having feelings and having thoughts. So very, very important for Leibniz that machine has perception. Well, what Leibniz tells us, we can think of that in our imagination, but let's actually walk into a mill. It's a very simple machine. What we see are cocks and levers and wheels, maybe. And what is missing with the mill? What is missing? What's missing is self-motion. The mill doesn't move by and out of itself. There's nothing that sets it, there's nothing in it that sets it into motion. Quite the opposite. It either needs wind or water. It needs its mineral water mill. So it needs something else that is by itself in motion to be moved or to be in movement. Therefore, what it's lacking is what the ancient Greeks called physis. which means self-growth or self-growing out of itself. And all mechanical, all machinistic definitions of the universe, of of bodies, etc., like Thomas Hobbes's, for example, they all lack the appreciation of the thought of physis. Where is self-growth? There isn't. For example, Laplace, when in the 19th century he presented to Napoleon his model of the universe, Napoleon asked him, "Where is God?" And Laplace replied, "I don't need that hypothesis here." Because he had sketched out the perfect mechanistic model, but what's lacking in that model, because that's all it is, it's just a model, it's not real, is self-growth and self-motion. And Leibniz shows us here in that mill example that yes, the mill is turning, yes, the wheel is turning, you see something there. You see movement, you see motion. When you walk inside, there's nothing that indicates it, there's nothing that sets it into motion. It's just wind and water. And therefore, what he comes up with is the monads. The monads are appetitus and perception. They have appetite for perception, you could say. These substances, these simple substances, are in themselves mirrors of the universe. They mirror everything in themselves. They are one and the infinite or the eternal in one. And here you have the attempt to have a sort of a theory that doesn't fall for either a crude dualism, as Malebranche would, or a crude monism, as materialists would. So think about this always, that you want to look for a philosophy that can actually think self-growth, physis, that grows out of itself. The other term, of course, in Greek philosophy is psyche, where we get the word psyche from, the soul of the world, the soul of the body, the soul of animals. Also for Aristotle, it's quite clear that animals have soul. Is why? Because psyche is just of the higher organic beings, is what determines and constitutes their self-growth. And anywhere where that is lacking, you're faced with a very crude mechanistic model of the world, which fails